Thank you very much, Joe. Pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed that last speaker. He was great. He was really terrific. Learned a lot on that one. Could do that all day long. So let's see. Where shall I start? Anybody in the audience in the field of eDiscovery or computer forensics at all? One? Okay, good. Lawyers? Any lawyers? No? Okay. All right. So the issue of eDiscovery and or computer forensics and or investigations is so broad. There are many, many areas that where you could sort of spend an entire day or an entire week really just delving into. So I've picked a few different hot topics within that space to discuss today. And I'll start with discussing eDiscovery, and then I'll go into some of the current contemporary risks and challenges that are facing, well, corporations, individuals, governments, and litigants as it relates to technology. I'll then sort of delve into a few of the interesting areas within that. And I encourage anybody to ask questions along the way, or agree or disagree with a point I make, or provide a counterpoint, or if you have any question whatsoever. I'll be covering a lot of material, and I'd be happy to entertain those questions as we go. I'll spend a few minutes on this slide here so that everybody can become familiar with it. This is a model known as the Electronic Discovery Reference Model. Has anybody in the room heard of this? One person? Okay. Two. Our cameraman in the back. Good. So the Electronic Discovery Reference Model was developed over the last 10 years for the purpose of trying to provide a graphic illustration of how the eDiscovery process works. eDiscovery took form late 90s, early 2000s as businesses made the transition from paper documents into electronic documents. And in the old days, when you would do discovery, you would ask of the other side, or you'd provide the other side with your discovery requests, and what you'd receive in return would be banker boxes full of documents. And you would go through a process of reviewing those documents. And you, of course, would have to provide the other side with your own documents, usually in paper form. In the contemporary world, within the world of what we now call eDiscovery or electronic discovery, all of those documents, or most of them for that matter, are electronic. And they come from a variety of formats. It could be email, it could be Office, Microsoft Office documents, PDF documents, it could be printouts from databases, it could be really any electronic document. And I define a document as anything, any digital file, really. So yes, question? A photograph could be an electronic document, absolutely. Because a photograph today is really not even a photograph, right? It's a digital image. And the digital image is a document. So a text could be a document, a text that you would receive on your handheld device. A log file from a router or from a server could be an electronic document. So because there are so many types of electronic documents, the cost and complexity associated with managing all of that data has increased exponentially. And an entirely new industry was born over the last 15 years, the electronic discovery industry. And it has driven the price and the cost of litigation up dramatically. So much so that federal judges and state judges alike have complained that justice is not being served often because litigants cannot afford to bring their case to trial because they're forced into a position of doing a risk-reward analysis in the discovery phase of the case to determine whether or not it even makes sense to respond to a discovery request. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I was on a case where Intel was the defendant, and the lawsuit was for, I forget the exact amount, so I'll give you an estimate. Approximately $10 million in damages was the calculus as to what they thought the potential exposure was. The plaintiffs had made significant eDiscovery requests of them, and at the time, Intel developed an estimate as to what it would cost to respond to those discovery requests, which entailed them collecting electronic data from backup tapes and email servers and file servers around the globe. It was close to $40 million for them to respond. So what did they do? They settled. The case was never heard. The merits of the case are still up in question, or up in the air in terms of whether or not they were appropriate or not. So this happens in big cases and small cases. If it's an individual defendant and they're facing an electronic discovery bill of $20,000 to have a forensic examiner come in and image their hard drive and provide a report, yet the total potential exposure in the case is maybe only $25,000 or $30,000, they may just simply elect to settle because it is so onerous. Well, over time, over the last several years, and currently to this day, there are many initiatives in this eDiscovery industry and within the legal community and within the judicial community to try to find ways to streamline the process, to develop standards of care, particularly as it relates to the technologies that are used for managing and processing and hosting the data, and to reduce some of the costs. One of the cost drivers in the past has been that there's been a lack of, or I should say a shortage of qualified individuals who understand the process and understand the technology to the extent that it was necessary, and as a result, those players would charge whatever the market would bear, which was oftentimes significant costs. It was not unusual to find eDiscovery vendors and their employees charging more per hour than the attorneys that were working on the case. Now that is starting to change, and pricing is coming down, and it will eventually get there, I think. So what this chart illustrates is the following. In the background, you'll see two colors. On the left-hand side, this sort of yellow color represents the volume of data that is available to, let's say, the defendants and the plaintiffs, the universe of data within litigation. And on the right side, you have this blue section that talks about relevance. So the purpose of the boxes that you see in the foreground are to have a process that takes a large volume of data and over time, moving from left to right, reduces the volume of the data while at the same time increasing the relevance of the data. And there are a number of processes which can effectuate that, from attorney review of documents to electronic management of large document sets and filtering documents based on keywords or date ranges and this type of thing. And many of these squares represent processes that are actually iterative, where there will be multiple opportunities for an individual or a group of individuals to go back and forth between these squares. So I'm going to quickly walk you through the squares from left to right, starting with information management. Information management is a real growth area right now in the eDiscovery space, and it's the part of eDiscovery that intersects with what we call information governance, records and information management, and privacy. Much of the information management work is done within the corporate environment prior to litigation. So by example, take a large multinational company that is in constant litigation and has a particular type of litigation profile and has a large in-house counsel group of attorneys. They may decide, in order to reduce their overall spend, to try to manage the electronic data in an effective way by implementing tools and systems that catalog their electronic data. It could be their email, their files on file servers, etc., and which will allow the attorneys to more quickly and more efficiently access those records when they are subject to a discovery request, or if they are required for an internal investigation. And you'll see later on in the presentation I will describe how internal investigations and eDiscovery and regulatory requirements, which also touch on the governance side, are all intersecting. And they're intersecting at the same time with a rapid development in online fraud, privacy concerns, and the ability of the bad guys that are out there, the hackers for hire, et cetera, to impact businesses by conducting data breach activities. Now, as you move from the information management side on the far left, which is generally what I call behind the firewall of a company, you then go into the next step, which is the identification of data. Sometimes the identification is pre-litigation, so that a company that's taking proactive steps to understand where their data lives and understands that they will be sued eventually, or they will need access to this data, they go through a process of identifying where the data lives. Or the identification process can be in conjunction with litigation, where a party understands that there's a reasonable expectation of litigation, and they now need to begin a process of identifying where the data lives. Once litigation begins or is truly imminent, you go into this step of either preservation or collection or both at the same time. And I'm not going to go into the nuances of the differences between these two, but at this point, because I think in the interest of time, but leave it to say that the preservation and collection processes within the eDiscovery model are the steps that generally a computer forensic analyst or an IT specialist of some sort will use at the direction of counsel or at the direction of some other management party within an organization to preserve and forensically seal data that exists within an organization. The world of computer forensics, which has run parallel in growth with eDiscovery, its fundamental foundation really is this notion of being able to preserve data in an unalterable fashion so that it can be examined and used in a court of law or elsewhere. So you then go into the next step, and generally this next step, which consists of these three boxes, processing, review, and analysis, is the most expensive step of the eDiscovery process, because this is where you, number one, have to start engaging third parties usually to process your data, and then to host it. Hosting meaning you take all of your electronic data that has been filtered for keywords or for dates, and you place it on a third-party review platform. Right now, the de facto standard is that those review platforms are hosted in the cloud, on secure servers, and that attorneys, either in-house counsel or outside counsel, can then log into those systems and review documents, and of course flag those documents for either privilege or relevance or confidentiality or various issues. It's not unusual to find cases where you will have hundreds of attorneys on one case remotely logging into one of these systems and flagging documents for a period of weeks or months as they prepare through the discovery process for trial.
And each person is able to see the other person's notes?
It depends. There's a lot of flexibility in these types of systems. In some cases, you want to wall off certain groups so they cannot see what the other groups are doing. In some cases, the defendant and the plaintiffs will agree to share a platform, and you can wall off both sides, both accessing similar documents or the same documents. I have a case right now where it's a set of probably 5 or 6 million documents out of an original population of hundreds of millions of documents, and those 5 or 6 million documents need to be reviewed by forensic accountants. They have to be reviewed by damages experts. They have to be reviewed by software experts because it's a software systems failure case, and they have to be reviewed by counsel. Eventually, they will get to a point where they will have productions that they can make. to the other side. And through these software systems, those productions will be made electronically. The other side will then ingest those documents in their document review platform and review them. Similarly, the opposing side will eventually load us up with millions of documents to review. The process is mind-bending in terms of what it takes to get through these things, and there's trap doors everywhere where problems can take place, and spoliation could be the result of that, because it's very easy for documents to either get left behind or yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. So production, of course, is that next step. Yes.
When we're looking at corruption of even on our own hard drive, how often is it doing hundreds of millions that you have corrupted files?
So in a case with hundreds of millions of files, you are definitely going to find corrupted files. You will find files that are unreadable. You will find files that are encrypted. You end up developing a subset of documents of files that are, for some reason, have issues or challenges, and then you try to go through them. If they are files that are encrypted, you try to acquire a key. If they are files that are unreadable, you place them in a separate bucket. And through this whole process, these systems also provide an electronic privilege log, so that you're able to have an audit of what has been set aside if you get challenged on it by the other side downstream. After production, you eventually get to the presentation phase, which is when you're in the courtroom and these millions of documents have all distilled themselves down to 5 exhibits or 100 exhibits or whatever it may be. But it's daunting, and for smaller cases and for litigants that are not prepared for this undertaking, it can unfortunately subvert the case. So I'm going to move on. Any questions on the model by chance? No? Okay. It's all available online at a website called edrm.org. And it's a group out of Minneapolis run by a couple of fellows who decided to put this model together, and it's been informally adopted in my industry as the model. So as I said early, I'm going to jump around to a few different sort of rabbit holes, if you will, touching on different things that are sort of relevant. Here's some examples of expert testimony subjects in eDiscovery related matters. Being that we're all expert witnesses, I thought I'd throw a few of them up here for you. Some of them are pretty straightforward, some are not. As an example, cost shifting disputes, the third item. This is where you will be hired as an expert, an eDiscovery expert, to review the reasonableness of any particular eDiscovery request. As these litigants in large cases are going through these eDiscovery processes, you may end up in multiple hearings over each step of the eDiscovery process, because each step that is taken may have million-dollar implications, such as I want all of the files in TIFF images. In other words, I want images of the files as opposed to what we call native files. So you understand the difference. You can provide a Microsoft Word document right off of your computer. That's what we call a native document. Many litigants, though, want what they call TIFF images. A TIFF image is essentially a photograph of that Microsoft Word document. And there are epic battles between both sides over which one will prevail as the standard for the particular case. And there's pros and cons for both. And there's certainly cost implications. Yes?
Erik, if you convert to TIFF, how do you get metadata from the Word?
Great question. So Michael asked, how do you get the metadata from the TIFF image if you convert to TIFF? And that's historically been one of the great arguments against going to TIFF, because providing the full set of metadata has been difficult. One of the workarounds for that is that today you can also provide with a TIFF image a separate slip sheet that has all of the metadata fields separately articulated. But of course you may lose a lot of functionality if you're providing simply a TIFFed image, particularly with documents that are complex documents that have embedded documents within the documents. There's all sorts of things that come up. Yes? So metadata, thank you very much for that. Metadata is what I call the data about the data. Each file on your computer, on your cell phone, on any electronic file, for that matter, will have what we call metadata embedded in it, which you, as the user of the device, may not see. You may see some of it, but you may not see most of it. But you can access most of it in many cases. The example being that if you go to a Microsoft Word document and you drill down to properties, you can see some of the metadata, such as the date that it was created, the date that it was last saved, the date that it was printed, the date that it was modified. You can see the operating system that was used to create the document. You may be able to see the fonts that were used, the colors that were used, the initials of the individual that created the document. That's all called metadata. Now, in the case of digital photography, there's all sorts of fields that contain that have relevant metadata, including, in some cases, the geographic coordinates of where the photograph was taken, which can be super helpful if you're trying to understand if a photograph is a true and legitimate photograph during your forensic analysis. So I'll give you one example off this list. Obviously, we don't have time to go through all of them, but and of course, you can at the end I put in red help to establish the extent of damages, just by an example. Here's some different things that you can, as a forensic expert in the eDiscovery process, assist with. You can help to establish wrongful conduct, such as theft of trade secrets, establish magnitude of disclosures, culpability of third parties, acts of misconduct, such as the deletion of documents or related activities that could eventually lead to sanctions, punitive damages, adverse inference, etc. Here's some examples of evidence deletion, since I just mentioned deletion. You can delete log files. You can modify registry settings in a computer. You can delete temporary files. You can delete operating system files. All of these devices are potentially susceptible to some form of deletion and modification. And oftentimes the cases hinge on whether or not data has been altered, modified, deleted, etc. So the technology aspect of these cases and of eDiscovery sort of starts to flow into the fraud world and vice versa, because they're somewhat interrelated now. The technology, simply because we do everything online, we're all interconnected, and as a result, investigations and the sort of the investigative mindset has to be brought into your fraud investigations, your technology analysis, and of course, much of that ends up in litigation. So there's this connection of all these various disciplines that oftentimes the computer forensic analyst or investigator will have to have some sensibility to appreciate and to help articulate. And I'll get, yes, question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I'm from Texas.
I gathered that earlier, yes. They do things differently there, yes.
Yeah, we have different rules and haven't caught up to all the California rules. But have the courts caught up to the advances in technology? Specifically, when we're involved in the case, a lot of times we specifically say we want machine-readable data and not necessarily get it even though we know it's available. So I guess my question is, what rights do the parties have to say, you want the data? Fine, but I'm not going to give it to you. Machine-readable data, I'm going to make you go through it.
So those fights end up in discovery fights. Machine-readable data versus human-readable data. I think of theft of trade secret cases where source code is the issue, and you want to be able to read the code. You want to be able to understand the logic behind the database that's behind the code, or whatever it may be. And I don't think there's any one practice, and I think courts interpret that differently. So I think it's still very much a moving target. But I'm glad you brought up how they do things differently in Texas. In Texas, the computer forensic space is very interesting. You, as a computer forensic technician, must be licensed in the state of Texas as a private investigator. In other words, you have to know all about blood spatter and all these types of things. Without that licensure, you cannot operate as a computer forensic analyst in your great state. We've had some interesting cases where that issue has been brought up, and forensic experts have been thrown out. So if you are working on a case in Texas and you have there's a forensic component to it, computer forensic component to it, you need to make sure that whoever you're working with is in fact licensed.
Well, I'm a CPA and we do fraud and forensic accounting, and there was a debate going on as to whether or not we had to get an PI license as well. And the state worked it out for exempt.
It's good.
Close call.
Yeah. Well, there are, I think, 5 states now that require a local state license, and frankly, I think it's designed to protect the industry within that state. There's been a lot of debate within my industry over the topic, but here are some different cases that all have this same sort of technology, fraud, investigation, litigation nexus. Lehman Brothers, which was a matter that I worked on for many years, was full of these issues. It was thousands and thousands of systems that all contained data, and our job was to try to understand what led to the failure, real specifically. How did the bank fail? And Madoff, another matter that we worked on extensively, where it all came down to data or the lack of data. Snowden, Target, Sony, et cetera. I put on Hillary's server because that's the one coming up. I can't wait to see what happens there. So since I highlighted Target, I'll give you an example. Typical data breach investigation, the example being Target. These are the things that one has to think about, and all of these flow into the litigation world and into the eDiscovery responsibilities of either the defendant or the approach that the plaintiff will take. Data identification and preservation, internal communication controls and teams, third-party vendor and customer management. These are all sort of buckets of tasks that folks in our industry have to assist with when it comes to things like a data breach investigation. And as you go through that process, you eventually end up at a place where you may be a fact witness, or you may be or perhaps you're an independent witness that is, testifying witness has been brought in by the other side. A lot of moving parts to these cases. Here's actually how we believe Target was compromised. You all remember the Target breach, I'm sure, where millions and millions of consumer records had been compromised. This is the website of a company that was providing air conditioning and other air conditioning services and other services to some Target facilities. And they're based in, I think, Philadelphia, I think. And what happened, what we understand at this point, and don't hold me to it because there's a lot of conjecture here, but our current belief is that the bad guys were able to infect this smaller company's systems. And through the access that this company had to the Target systems, because they were a preferred vendor, they were able to introduce malware into the Target environment through a third-party vendor. Malware, in case anybody doesn't know what that is, that's like a virus, malevolent software, right? Malware. And the idea is that that's software that's been designed to do something bad. And so here you have malware that's been introduced into Target. That malware infects all of the Target POS systems, point of sale systems. They're cash registers, essentially. So every time a sale is made, data is being collected by the malware, and it's being harvested by that malware. And then in little bits, drips and drabs, it's sent to the bad guys wirelessly. And they were very clever the way they did it, because they made sure that there weren't large chunks of data are sent, and they also made sure that the data was only sent during business hours. So it was very clever. So this introduces us into a new world of contemporary risks and realities. I don't know, but to the extent that I doubt they're really even liable. I mean, it's the malware was designed specifically to attack Target, and they were looking for different portals. And an organization like Target, like any major firm like that, has relationships, third-party, handshake relationships electronically with hundreds or thousands of vendors, and each one of those introduces new potential holes into the system. Yes?
Eric, would that be an inside job either on the target side or the vendor side? Someone who knows the protocol?
It very well could be, absolutely. The question was, could that have been an inside job either by somebody at Target or somebody at the aircon HVAC company? Very possible. It's always excuse me, not always. Often the trusted insider is the biggest risk. In fact, it's the final bullet point on this slide. Somebody knows how to do the handshake or understands the vulnerabilities within the network. Yes?
What's the objective of criminals doing it? Were they after credit card information to fraud their customers, or were they just trying to destroy the company?
Well, it's presumed in this particular case that the objective was to harvest personally identifiable information of the consumers. Why, right? So the answer to that is because then what the bad guys do is they enter all that data into the underground black market network for the purchase and sale of consumer data. There are websites out there on the internet today that are run by hacking groups, criminal underground organizations that will buy and sell large volumes of this. Many of us in this room right now have had our data sold on these systems to other bad guys. And what they do is they produce fake credit cards. I mean, they look real. They are real, really. They're real credit cards with your information encoded on the stripe. And then they send out what they call mules out into the environment, real people, to stores like Best Buy. And they'll say, use this card. Buy whatever you can. And so they'll go to Best Buy and buy a camera, and they'll go to Target and buy a television, and they'll keep using these cards until they run out. Then all the goods get collected, and then they sell those goods for cash. Yes.
Something like that, wouldn't, for example, let's say I was a bad guy. I would have a credit card that has my name on the front. It would have your account encoded on the mag strip, so that when they say, "Can I see your ID?" the ID is matched.
Sure.
Yeah, that's why they have to have 4 digits at the register to make sure they come back to the card.
That's right. That's right. And the equipment that is available to produce the credit cards for the credit card companies is available to the criminal underground as well. So they have unlimited options. There's another question over there? No? Yes.
Quick, just so people don't think it's just vendor websites. I heard of a case in New York. There was a big financial firm, and the hackers knew that they always used this one restaurant for takeout, and always went to that website for takeout. So somehow they planted something on that website, and that's how they infiltrated their system by going to a third-party website. They knew that they frequently.
It's a very good point. So the restaurants in Lower Manhattan and Wall Street, if I'm sitting there at dining and the fellow wants to take my credit card away from the table, I'm concerned, right? Because they can go into the back and they can swipe it and they use what they call skimmers to keep the data, or it could be online or whatever it may be. So these are some contemporary risks and realities of the new age, and they're just general concepts. They fit into this presentation, but they fit into the risks that are facing all of us right now. Proliferation of offensive computing tools. What does that mean? That means that today you can go online and you can buy all the hacking tools that you need, just like you're buying Microsoft Word or Microsoft Outlook, and you don't need to be a programmer anymore. You don't have to have a mohawk and spikes and all that sort of thing. Right now we can go online, we can buy the tools we want, we can create the malware, create the Trojan horse, figure out who the target is, and attack. It's the proliferation of offensive computing tools. Then you have the commercialization of the hacking community. Hackers in the old days, 10, 15 years ago, were computer geeks interested in breaking things and testing things and stretching the envelope, if you will. They'd get a big kick out of breaking the Microsoft Office software, and then they would call Microsoft and they'd say, "Fix it." And if you don't fix it, I'll tell the world about it. And they would fix it. But then the hacker gets some kudos at a hacking convention to brag about it. But today, those same hackers are working for the criminal underground in Russia and China and elsewhere, and for governments. And they're harnessing that knowledge to attack systems everywhere. Borderless computing environment. We essentially live in a borderless community now. I can be communicating as easily with each of you right now as I could be with somebody sitting in Cairo right now, right, using my handheld device. This is my window to the world. It's extraordinary. We have jurisdictional uncertainties and challenges. So when a cybercrime or some event takes place, it's very difficult to chase after the bad guys. I'm on a case right now where my client lost millions and millions of dollars out of their bank account on a Friday afternoon. The hackers were able to trick the accounting clerk into providing the login credentials, and the hackers got in, bang, immediately, within minutes, millions of dollars transferred to different bank accounts around the world, and impossible to get it back. Very challenging. Shortage of skilled. Yep. Pardon?
The bank's not liable?
So if it's your personal account, absolutely the bank's liable. If it's your corporate account, big question mark, and that's where the fight will take place. Shortage of skilled first responders. Very hard to find folks that have the ability to be on the front line, and they're expensive, and it's a problem. Another interesting contemporary risk, and that's the trusted insider. They are truly to Mike's question, that's the biggest risk today, because you have to give the keys to somebody, and it could be the person in the next cubicle, and they may have ill intent. Desperate people do desperate things, so you never know how people are going to take that trusted position. Question in the back first.
What's the state of the art of trying to stop some of this stuff?
It depends on what attack vector you're talking about. The general theme right now in the computing world for protection of systems is, number one, encryption, and number two, two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication means that if I want to be authenticated, I have to do it through some password plus perhaps a dongle or maybe a code that shows up on my phone that I then have to put in. Like I was on PayPal back here making a payment to somebody for a dinner I went to the other night, and I sent him a payment, but I was doing it from my Surface tablet, and I'd never been on PayPal on my Surface tablet. So PayPal sent me a challenge code to my phone, which I then had to put onto the tablet. That's two-factor authentication. And of course, the communication going back and forth is encrypted, so PayPal's pretty safe in that regard. Another question, Mike.
The question, Eric, is why is the United States so far behind the rest of the world on this? I recall in 1998 in France, the waiter would come to your table with a swipe device, so your card never left your presence. The other aspects are that we're not going to go to chip and pin. We're going to go to chip and swipe. So, when it comes to signing on digital tablets, the rest of the world uses 3D parameters, biometrics. We use 2D biometrics.
Yeah. So the question is, why are we so far behind the rest of the world? That's a social question. It's a regulatory question. It's a business question. There's many answers to that. I probably don't have time to get into the debate now. I'd like to later. But one thing I will say is that in the U.S., you've had this mechanism where banks have had to take responsibility for the personal loss, enforced, of course, by the federal government, and that has loosened, if anything, the controls, whereas in many other nations, the loss is yours. So, but there's a big question we should talk about at another time. In the interest of time, we've only got about 19 minutes left and about 1,900 slides. So I'm going to show you some fun ones here. This is a photograph at a conference that I took called DEF CON. Has anybody here heard of DEF CON? Oh, good. More people have heard of DEF CON than the EDRM. I like that. All right, so DEF CON is the biggest annual hacker convention, and it takes place in Las Vegas every July. When I first started going there 20 years ago, it was 1,600 people who would show up. Again, they all had blue hair and piercings and tattoos, and they would get drunk all night long and brag about their exploits. And it was, frankly, quite amusing. Yeah, a lot of fun, and my alter ego or something, right? So I'd actually go there to recruit. So I try to find bright minds that I could turn to the bright side or the white side instead of the dark side. But anyhow, today that conference has evolved into a huge event with 20,000-30,000 hackers from around the world coming and trading knowledge about how to protect or how to attack. And this is an example of one of the breakout sessions. There were probably 2,000 people in this room. The photo, my camera wasn't a wide angle enough. It continued, 3 more screens that way, 3 more screens that way. The speaker is talking about SCADA systems vulnerabilities. Does anybody know what a SCADA system is? A couple. Excellent. And these systems are used to control nuclear power plants. They're used to control the electrical grid. They're used to control all of the heavy infrastructure that our country relies upon. And this man here from Texas, nice guy, he's telling the organization how to defeat those systems. And he's walking through all the steps, step by step, how to take all those oil derricks in West Texas offline en masse, or how to maybe make them overpump and blow up or something along these lines. So that will, yes, if you do it. But, there's many law enforcement personnel in the audience. They're taking pictures of everybody. They're closely listening. They're watching. But not only law enforcement from the United States, there's law enforcement from China and everywhere else sitting in that audience. Very scary stuff. But we live in a free and open society, thank goodness. And it's information. So what do you do with the information that's important? So the fellow who's speaking, he's not a terrorist, I hope. He actually works for a company in Texas that defends against these types of attacks. But in his position is, well, he wants to share the knowledge. So there you go. It gets worse. Here's a session that I attended. It's all free, by the way. I mean, you pay $50 in cash to get in. You can't use a credit card, and all the sessions are free. This is a session that I attended, training you how to hack a cell phone. Now, you have no idea who you're sitting next to, right? and they give you all the equipment, and it teaches you how to. Pardon? Oh, hundreds. There were these rows of tables and teaching you how to hack cell phones. Yes.
Is there a company, an individual that owns that?
Yes.
Yeah, and because trade shows make huge amounts of
Oh,
money.
he makes a lot of money. His name is the Dark Tangent, and he lives in Long Beach, California.
Probably nobody paid to get there on their own dollars.
Everybody pays their own way to get there. I see. I see what you're saying. Yeah. July. I'll see you there. It'll be fun. Well, that particular session was showing you how to hack a cell phone by inserting malware onto the chip physically. And why would you want to do that? So that I can listen to your conversations, so that I can get your PIN for your code, so that I could get your photographs, maybe find out where you are, send me the geolocation information of where you are, because you're a target, and I want to know where you are. You're a, yeah, well, you never know. So here's another session I attended, training how to circumvent physical seals. Everybody knows what a physical seal is. You know, the bag and tag evidence. Let's say you're a police department and you get the evidence from the crime scene. You then take that evidence to the evidence lab. You drop it in there, and you seal the bag with an evidence tag, evidence seal. There's various types of evidence seals that law enforcement uses. This was a session that trained you how to defeat those seals, so that you could take them off, modify the evidence, put the evidence back in, and then seal it without any evidence that had been tampered with. I was marveling at it. I sat there for a couple of hours and learned how to take off these. Down on the bottom, you'll see these like tape strips, and if you take off the tape, the red remains, so you can tell that the seal has been tampered with. They taught me how to remove the tape without removing the red. Fascinating stuff. I mean, how do you rely on the evidence now if it's been tampered with? Well, they have them all over the world, but this is the biggest. I've been going to this one each year because you learn so much. Yeah, DEF CON, yeah. So this is the annual hacking contest. It goes on for 4 days, and teams from around the world, they play a game they call Capture the Flag. This is the Chinese team, and the idea is there's been one hardened server set up, and all of the teams have to attack that server and try to capture it or try to take control over it to own the server. And so again, this is the Chinese team, and they often win. Question?
Being a forensic analyst working with digital information, could it ever be brought in court that I handed one of these and that would disqualify me somehow?
I don't know. I would think that it would just simply make you more knowledgeable, and it's just part of the education. But I suppose a good attorney can take any position he wants. I don't know how it would disqualify you. Altering evidence? Well, it does. I mean, yeah. I mean, the fact that I know how to shoot a gun, does that mean that I somehow am a criminal? You know. So, lots of things for sale there too. Here they have a trade show, and people, they take tabletops and they show you, they sell things to you, or you could purchase things. There was a line out the door for this one. This was called the Pineapple. It's about the size of a pack of cigarettes. Let's say you go to the bank and you want to know what's happening in the bank. You show up and you drop one of these behind a plant or a flower, maybe in a flower pot or something, and it will wirelessly pick up all of the traffic in the bank and route it back to you in your car outside. Traffic from computers, wireless traffic from computers, exactly. And there's all this is what we call a man-in-the-middle attack. A lot of the banks that you read about and a lot of the health organizations that you read about who have been attacked, they've fallen victim to this type of attack. It's called a man-in-the-middle. Remember, we have trusted communication going over the air, and if you can, or over a wire, and if you can put something in between to intercept that data and just act as a relay, you can then filter that data out. And if it's unencrypted, hallelujah. If it is encrypted and you can somehow find the encryption key through some trusted person inside the bank, it's a home run. Yep. Lots. Yeah. How much sniffing goes on in a hotel? Lots. I travel to China a lot for my clients, and so I go in with the assumption that anything that I do on my computers is being watched and listened to. Hell, I don't even make backups anymore because the Chinese have it all. I mean, it's and if their backup goes down, the NSA has it, so I'm good. But yeah. So to the extent that you can use encryption on your computer, that's going to help. Certainly don't want to make your hotspot public, but this is a great place to sniff for traffic. I mean, if I was a criminal, I'd go to the best hotel in town, take a suite for a week, and just watch what's happening in the hotel and the communications that are going back and forth. I sat down at sometimes it's really easy though. I sat down at a computer terminal at my club in Los Angeles yesterday, and I had to print out a document. I sat down at the terminal because I needed to get online, print a document before a lunch. And right in front of me is the email program of the last guy who sat at the computer. He had forgotten to log out, and all of his data is right there. I could have immediately become him. I could have downloaded all of his data and his contacts. I mean, got to be careful. Close the door behind you, Absolutely. I could have taken I could have, exactly. So here's another version of one of these man-in-the-middle devices. This is called the rubber ducky. And what happens is you plug it into an open USB port on a unsuspecting computer, and you walk away. And it will then start to capture traffic. It'll allow you to remotely log in and get visibility into what's happening on the network. So by example, let's say you have a meeting at your biggest competitor, and you go to the receptionist desk, while you're waiting, or no, not competitor. Let's say a client. You want to try to figure out how to get into this client. So you're waiting in the waiting room, and the secretary gets up for a minute. You walk up behind the computer, which is sitting on the desk, and you just slot this thing right in there, and then you sit back in your chair until you're called for your meeting. Well, for the next few weeks, you're collecting all the data on the network, and you know everything you need to know. These sold out really quickly.
Are these slides going to be made available? I just noticed they're not part of our deck.
Correct. I actually yes, they'll be available. Yeah, I'll give you my card. By the way, I would like to announce I'm hosting a dinner tonight at 7:30 at a restaurant called Petrini's, a couple blocks away up in Little Italy. For those of you who'd like to attend, on behalf of the Los Angeles chapter of FEWA, please be my guest. We can accommodate 25 people or so, and love to have you. It's at 7:30, so see me in the back, and I'll give you the details. But of course, I'll send everybody the slides. So that photograph here shows Aramco being the Saudi Arabian American oil company, and it is the largest oil company in Saudi Arabia. It was hacked using one of those man-in-the-middle dongles like I showed you on the previous slide, and 30,000 computers were destroyed. We believe that it's the Iranians who led the attack. It brought Aramco to its knees. This was 2 years ago. And hundreds of consultants from the United States were deployed to bring Aramco back up online. They flew everybody out to Saudi Arabia, and they had to basically start from scratch. It was a devastating attack. So not only can you use it for listening, but you can use it to deploy malware and destroy systems. It's more than likely how Sony became victim. Gosh, 6 minutes. I think I'm going to move through some of these slides quickly. Here's a picture of the internet, in case you want to know what it looked like. This is a mapping project that was begun by Lucent many years ago. I think AT&T has control over it now, but it's a three-dimensional map of the internet, thinking of the internet in sort of a three-dimensional way. And I put that up there because as a forensic expert, when you're trying to follow evidence and track how things happen, you need to think about the internet in tangible ways, as opposed to just the ethereal. And here's an example of one of the tools that we use. It's called Sentinel Analyzer, and allows you to see all the people on a corporate network and understand the relationships between them. And if you have monitoring software, you can see how the traffic flows. There's a question in the back.
Can you give us an idea of when we send emails that contain confidential information, the susceptibility of those emails to interception? Like a CPA sent a tax return with a client's social security number, which I did not do, but
I think it really comes down to whether or not you are a target. If you are truly a target and somebody wants to get those emails, more than likely they're going to find a way. Everybody is vulnerable, but because we're not all targets, we're all also safe somewhat. If you truly want to protect yourself, deploy encryption and encrypt your email as it's moving. And so, for the tax return question, you want to zip those tax returns up and make sure that they're encrypted. So capturing data, here's the old way of doing things. Particularly on the web, we would use something called Camtasia, which would be like a videotape of what you see on the screen, but unfortunately would miss, as Michael pointed out, the metadata. Today we have lots of new tools, which I'm going to have to run through quickly. Here's a computer forensics field kit. When somebody goes into the field to collect a hard drive of a computer, this may be what they bring. And what they're doing is they're capturing a bit-by-bit forensic copy of the entire hard drive. And that includes not only the data that you would see as a user, but also what we call the unallocated space of the drive, which is the portion of the drive that the computer uses for managing memory. And it's there within that portion of the drive that you can recover deleted data. Because once you delete an email, it really isn't deleted. It's still on the hard drive. It just hasn't been overwritten. So with the right computer forensic tools, you can bring those emails back to life. Question? So the question is, if you reformat your drive, can you still get to the deleted email? In many cases, yes. If you do, however, what they call a DoD wipe, which is where you apply zeros or ones or whatever it may be to each sector on the drive, overwriting the entire drive, then the answer would be no, unless I'm told the NSA has some electronic microscopes they can use to actually ferret out data. But for commercial purposes, no. Here's a website called X1 Social Discovery. This is the tool that is used now to collect social media data in a forensically sound manner. So if you're on a case and the issue is, let's say it's a slip and fall, and the plaintiff is no longer working, and it puts in a workers' comp claim, but you discover on Facebook that they're actually down in Mexico dancing on tables, having margaritas, you want to capture that data. And this is what the insurance companies are all using now. They will use X1 to go up to Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever it is and forensically collect that data so it's preserved and sound. That tool is, I believe, $900 a year for the tool. Yep. I was going to talk a little bit about basics of forensics. This is what a computer hard drive looks like if you take off the cover. Basically, they spin at about 7,200 RPM, and you have an actuator arm on it, which looks like the arm of a record player. I do know that all of you know what a record player is. Yes, and it as you zoom in. This is on a very basic level, but you have sectors and clusters where data is deposited, and this is where your files actually live, on a hard drive. And they're deposited on the hard drive in a random fashion because it's spinning at this high speed. They're very efficient, and so that your files may live either pieces of them all over the place or an entire file all over the place. And they spin around like this. So when you do something called a defrag, or defrag your hard drive to make it run faster, essentially what you're doing is you're taking the allocated clusters, which are your files, that the red ones may be an email, and the green one may be a picture, and the yellow one may be a web browsing history. And all the blue is your unallocated space. And what it does is when you defrag it, it brings everything down to all the what we call the allocated spaces all the way to the center of the drive for more efficiency. But in so doing, it also it leaves residual data in the unallocated clusters that you can retrieve. So you've probably seen this, some of you, on your computers when you try to see how much space is left on your computer. So that white part of the pie is the unallocated space, and it may actually be full of data, but your operating system is telling you that it's actually available, and that's because it's available to be overwritten. So using the computer forensic tools, once again, you go into the unallocated space and you pull out all of your old email. This is what it looks like to the forensic examiner. It's computer gibberish and gobbledygook, but using these tools, you're able to find certain things. There's a known data type. It's called HTML. That's a tag, right? Lots of data sources today, as you probably recognize all these, but it's getting better. The Internet of Things, as we call it now. Data is coming to a store near you real quick. Here's a coffee maker that keeps data. Here's your Tesla. Down here we have the defibrillator that is wireless, and it will collect data. All of these points are places where in our world we can start to collect data for any given particular case. Lots of new devices out there. All of these cell phones, billions of them around the globe. By 5 years from now, I'm told there will be more cell phones than humans. One of the challenges we have with cell phones is they're very difficult to collect data from. So sometimes we have to do what we call chip-off forensics, where we take this device and we melt all the connectors to the chip by heating it to 600 or 700 degrees, and we physically take the chip off of the board and we put it into this reader so that we can read what's in there. So I actually reached the end of this thing. Fabulous. Final thought, the human quotient. It's no matter what happens until machines are doing our jobs, which may not be in the too distant future, it's still the human factor. The trusted source, somebody who has access. This is a photograph at DEF CON in the main sort of hallway as people are going back and forth between the various sessions. And I sat down and just observed them for about 10 minutes, took a bunch of pictures, and I was thinking to myself, who's the bad guy?
The guy taking the picture.
Is it that guy? What do you make of him? First guy had a ponytail. Second guy has a mohawk. People would automatically go after him, right? Maybe it's this guy looking at his phone. He's late for the meeting with the Russian hacker. Maybe it's this guy sitting on the floor there. Maybe it's that guy over there. There's very few women there. Most of them are they're called Gothic. They're all in black and that sort of thing. Yeah, could be. Could be. You never know. So, this is my book, Investigative Computer Forensics. If you're interested, there's a FEWA 30% discount. That's the code on Wiley.com, or it's also available on Amazon.com. Hope you don't mind the advertisement. And thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again. If anybody wants to join us for dinner tonight at 7:30, please be the guest of the Los Angeles chapter. Oh, Petrini's Restaurant. Petrini's